Hear the word of the Lord from Ecclesiastes chapters 6 and 7. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This is also vanity, vapor. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and it's an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated.
Peace be with you. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Adam. I serve as one of the elders here, and it's an honor to be entrusted to preach God's word, even more so on our 15th birthday celebration. I want to start today with a question that kids may be able to answer better than adults. You guys ready? Here's the question. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? Now, I asked both of my kids this question separately, and I was surprised they both had the same answer, and that was the ability to teleport. I didn't even know that they knew what the ability to teleport was, honestly. Now, a Marist poll from 2018 asked over 1,000 American adults this same question, and the ability to teleport was number one for those under age 30. But for all adults considered, the number one answer was actually the ability to time travel. So there are many potential motivations behind choosing the ability to time travel. It could be regret, perhaps the desire to go back to the past and undo a mistake. Maybe foreknowledge, just wanting to see something in the future. It could be nostalgia, the desire to go back to experience something memorable again, or anticipation, to just skip ahead to something that you're waiting for. Or perhaps we just had a bunch of Back to the Future fans, I don't know, that were over 30 in this survey. But all of these motivations in some way offer a sense of control in a chaotic and unpredictable world. Now, in 2017, the American Psychological Association synthesized various surveys that were asked this question: would you want to be able to see into the future? Now, roughly half, 30 to 60%, as they synthesized the survey, said that they would want to know about upcoming positive events. But only 10 to 15% said that they would want to know about upcoming negative events. And only 1% across all the questions said, yes, I want to know the future. So why is time travel the most desired superpower, and yet only 1% of people actually want to know the future? Well, perhaps people typically don't want to know the future because they realize that controlling the future is nothing but a fantasy, right? It's impossible. So if you're visiting with us today, we're at the midpoint of a 15-week series going through the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And the theme of our passage this morning, and therefore the theme of our sermon, is this: embrace the sovereign wisdom of God, who alone knows best. Now we'll bounce around a bit in our passage today to help us focus on three main ideas. First, pondering prosperity. Second, accepting adversity. And third, glorifying God. So let's begin with pondering prosperity. Now, the big idea of our passage is introduced in the first few verses 10 through 12 of chapter 6, and it concludes with a summary exhortation in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. But in the middle, verses 1 through 12 of chapter 7 is a series of provocative proverbs, which we will focus on first. What we find in this passage 12 times is the Hebrew word tov in just these 17 verses. And it's uniquely translated in verse 1 as precious and in verse 14 as prosperity and joyful. But throughout the rest of the passage, it's translated as good or better. Good or better. And so a significant theme emerges in this series of proverbs, and that's this: things associated with prosperity are good, but things associated with adversity are surprisingly better. So prosperity is good, but not always best. So look with me at verses 1 through 6 of chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death and the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. So we see a few examples of the so-called good life associated with prosperity here. We see precious ointment, feasting, laughter, and what's called the house of mirth, which just means pleasure or festivity or celebration. But as Matt highlighted last week, just as the love of money is insatiable, the pursuit of prosperity is also unsatisfying. Just consider the famous theologian Jim Carrey. So when presenting an award at the 2016 Golden Globes, a modern-day house of mirth, if you will, the announcer said, "Please welcome two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey." Thank you. I am two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. You know, when I go to sleep at night, I'm not just a guy going to sleep. I'm two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey, going to get some well-needed shut-eye. And when I dream, I don't just dream any old dream. No, sir. I dream about being three-time Golden Globe winning actor Jim Carrey, because then I would be enough. It would finally be true. And I can stop this terrible search for what I know ultimately won't fulfill me. But these are important, these awards, he went on. So in a sense, this was a clever rebuke from someone in Hollywood who had become relatively wise. And yet the audience responded with the uncomfortable laughter of fools. See, earlier in his career, in a 2005 interview, Carrey said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer." So I don't know what exactly you are dreaming of personally, but take Jim Carrey's word for it. Prosperity is enjoyable, but not satisfying. Look with me at verses 8 through 10. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? for it is not from wisdom that you ask this. See, when we are dissatisfied with the present, many escape by reflecting on the nostalgia of the past. Nostalgia is like a fantasy superpower. We travel back in time to relive fond memories in our thoughts. What prompts you to imagine going back to the past? Is it to relive your high school glory days? Is it all that time you had to spend with friends in college? Maybe it's wishing to raise your kids in some other era, maybe the 90s. Or is it just recalling special moments with someone no longer in your day-to-day life? But this view of the former days, says verse 10, is not from wisdom. Why? Well, nostalgia typically just amplifies your frustration with the present, or it creates unrealistic expectations for the future, or perhaps both. See, your remembrance of past prosperity is often delusional. Just think of the Israelites who, after being freed from slavery in Egypt, grew tired of miraculous manna from heaven and said, "Oh, that we just had this meat to eat like we did in Egypt." See, nostalgia can be foolish when it forgets the evil and suffering of the past. Prosperity can be recalled, but not recreated. So instead of daydreaming about the past, recognize that God has intentionally placed you in your current situation right now. Find things to be thankful for in the present as well as the past, and trust God with hope for the future. Looking at verse 11 through 13. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun, for the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? The main point, I think, here is that both wisdom and money do provide protection, in a sense, but wisdom is better. See, money, in a sense, represents worldly prosperity, whereas wisdom represents more spiritual prosperity. The world says saving money can protect your future, secure your future. Maybe, to some extent, but again, as Matt emphasized last week, money won't secure. So wisdom can protect you by helping you avoid foolish actions and their associated consequences. Wisdom can also preserve life. It can keep you on the path of life. It can provide perhaps a more fulfilling life. In our fallen world, some things just seem crooked. Wisdom cannot prevent sudden accidents, illnesses, or death. So prosperity is an advantage, but not a guarantee. Wisdom is good, but limited. It cannot make things straight, but it can change our response to things that seem crooked. So in summary, prosperity can be good, but when pursued by fools, it proves unsatisfying, alluring, and insufficient. So let's move from pondering prosperity to explore our second idea, and that is accepting adversity. So I want us to think, Is our community characterized more by rebukes or flattery? Do we just want to be nice, or do we want to grow in maturity? Again, receiving a rebuke is often painful, but it can bring about wisdom. So if you consider your most personal Christian relationships, whether it's with a spouse, a sibling, a roommate or friends, or within your parish community, I encourage you to reflect together on a few of these questions. First, can you recall a time recently when you offered flattery, knowing you were just saying what the other person wanted to hear and not what was best for them? So what motivated that? Why did you do it? Second, when you see someone making foolish choices or stuck in sin, do you have the courage to offer a loving rebuke? And if not, why? What's keeping you from doing so? And then thirdly, how did you respond the last time you received a rebuke? So let's not be afraid either to give a rebuke or to receive a rebuke. To grow in wisdom, we should deal with disapproval through reflection, not distraction. Let's move on to dealing with disappointment, verses 8 through 10. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. So I want you to think of something in your life that started off promising, but it is currently not going how you imagined. Perhaps it's a career or job, maybe a relationship, maybe it's even your faith journey. The idea in verse 8 is effectively all is well that ends well. But when you encounter disappointments and you don't know the future, it can be hard, it can be really hard to believe that the end is better than its beginning. So take a moment to focus on one key disappointment that God brings to mind, whether from the past or the present. Was your response to the disappointment characterized more by patience or pride? The back part of verse 8 literally reads, "Length in spirit is better than height in spirit." Length in spirit being patience, height in spirit being pride. So the proud or high in spirit think they deserve better. They try to fix the situation at any cost. They become impatient with outbursts of anger directed at whoever they deem responsible for their disappointments, whether it be God, someone else, or maybe even themselves. And for fools, the anger can remain ever present and can lodge in the heart, and they become bitter. Alternatively, though, there is the patient or long in spirit. While fits of anger is a work of the flesh, patience is a fruit of the Spirit. Those who are patient don't become discouraged about the future when encountering disappointments in the present. They cling to promises like Romans 8:28 that says, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those that love God." See, the patient don't dispute with God, they endure with hope. So to grow in wisdom, deal with disappointments not with pride, anger, or despair, but rather with humility, patience, and hope. For our final point under the idea of accepting adversity, let's turn to dealing with death. So jump back to verse 1 and 2 of chapter 7. "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind." Now, in context, the day here refers not to your own birth and death, but rather the birth or death of a loved one. But how can the day of death be better than the day of birth? I mean, let's be honest, the day of death of a loved one can be devastating. And most parents, hopefully all, most parents would list the day of their children's birth among the best days of their life. So how can the day of death be better? Well, a day of birth may bring a resolve for someone to change, but the day of death can bring wisdom on how to change. As I was preparing, I was reminded of 2 funerals I've attended of people who sadly died in their 30s. First was Rob. Rob was a prominent lawyer and a former pro tennis player. I met him about 17 years ago in a men's small group Bible study as he was beginning to explore the Christian faith. And sadly, within months, he died unexpectedly in a motorcycle accident. And to this day, I think it was probably the saddest funeral I have ever attended. And not because I was so close to Rob, I was just getting to know him, but because the ceremony was so superficial and lighthearted. What should have been a house of mourning was masquerading as a house of mirth. Now, funerals should not be absent of celebration. There's a place for that. But what is being celebrated can either be meaningful and eternal, or it can be trivial and worldly. Now, to this day, I hope that Jesus saved Rob in the months before he passed. But clearly, the life he and his closest friends had lived, based on being present at his funeral, was full of worldly prosperity, yet ultimately empty. Now, the second funeral I thought of was that of Sarah Henson. So nearly 4 years ago, Sarah Henson, a sweet member of our congregation, died unexpectedly. Now, our prior pastor, Paul Ramsey, preached at her funeral. For those of you that were there were a few of us, I think. He did a remarkable job, and he actually teached out of this very text, Ecclesiastes 7, 1 through 4. Now, while I knew Sarah a little bit, I was so encouraged as I learned more about her at the ceremony. I heard stories about her pursuit of wisdom, her humility, her love, her warmth, and the impact she had on people inside and outside of our church. She was so clearly a person of depth. And Sarah didn't die with a lot of stuff. She didn't have a lot of worldly acclaim. But even as a quiet, unassuming, humble person, she clearly had a significant impact on many people. And her good name will live on with those who knew her and loved her. So the question is, when you die, do you want to be remembered for worldly acclaim or for eternal impact? If we could, let's shift from 2 funerals to considering 2 types of people at a funeral. Look at verses 3 and 4. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So it's not just about where you are physically located. When you attend a funeral, where is your heart? See, contemplating death is better than suppressing reality. The heart of the fool, though, is elsewhere. He's uncomfortable sitting in sadness. His thoughts are on escaping the funeral to get on with his fun weekend plans and find something fun to laugh about. But the heart of the wise, however, is appropriately sorrowful with sadness of face, fully engaged and present in the moment. He reflects on the life of the deceased, his own life, and his own looming death. See, funerals confront us with big questions about life and death. But the death of a loved one is not required to consider these weighty questions. I'd like to take a moment to consider a few right now. So if you're here today and, like Rob, are considering Christianity, I encourage you to reflect on these questions. What happens when I die? And if you find yourself standing before God and he asks you, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? I remember over 20 years ago, God used questions just like these, which, by the way, I did not know how to answer and had not thought enough about, to bring me to faith. And I hope that he does that with some of you today as well. But for Christians, I think we should reflect on a different set of questions, and that is this: am I more focused on prosperity or people? Which pursuit consumes my thoughts, my prayers, my time? And am I seeking above all else to live a life that is pleasing to God. So to grow in wisdom, deal with death by fully engaging the sorrow and reflecting on eternity and your life priorities. And to summarize, accept adversity as better than prosperity in that it helps us develop character and grow in wisdom. So let's move from accepting adversity to our last idea, glorifying God. So I want to start with a right view of man and God. Let's look at the beginning of our passage to highlight the big idea these provocative proverbs are expanding upon. So back in verse 10 of chapter 6. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is. So naming in Scripture essentially means to capture the nature of something, and it indicates that the one naming has knowledge and control over the one they're naming. And so thus, whatever has come to be has been known and is under control. In other words, the future is foreknown and ordained by God. Continuing in verse 10. And that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? This highlights the reality that God, the all-powerful creator of the universe, is stronger than man, a dependent, finite creature. Pretty self-evident, but sometimes we need a reminder of that. The Hebrew word for vanity used throughout Ecclesiastes is havel. And in this context, it's probably best translated as futility. This is saying it is futile for man to dispute with his sovereign, all-knowing creator. What's the advantage? What's the point? So rather than disputing against what God is doing, it is to your advantage to humbly seek to grow through adversity. Verse 12, for who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? This is really a series of two rhetorical questions, effectively saying this: man does not know what is good because man does not know what will happen next in this life. In other words, the future cannot be known by man. So the argument of verses 10 through 12 to begin our passage is that the future is foreknown and ordained by a sovereign God, unknown by dependent man, and therefore there is no point in disputing with him. Now let's jump ahead to after the Proverbs to focus on the conclusion and exhortation. So look at chapter 7, verse 13. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? To further emphasize God's control, verse 13 says that there are some things that he has made crooked, at least from our perspective. See, God's foreknowledge means not merely that he knows what will happen, but also that he has mysteriously ordained everything that will happen, both the straight and the crooked. Now, this is not fatalism, where all events are inevitably fixed by an impersonal force and human choices are meaningless. Rather, the doctrine of God's sovereignty suggests that God ordains all things for his good purpose, mysteriously working out his will through our real choices and actions. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity, be joyful, and in the day of adversity, consider. God has made one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. So in concluding this section, there is a surprising reason given in verse 14, at least it was surprising to me, as to why God has made both the day of prosperity and adversity. It says it's so that man cannot know the future. So no matter how much wisdom we accumulate, due to the unpredictability of prosperity and adversity under the sun in this life, we are not able to know what will happen next. So to glorify God, we must first have a right view of God and man. Recognize God as sovereign and we are dependent. Recognize God knows the future and he's hidden it from us. And trust his wise plan is good even when it seems crooked to us. Now, I want to deal with a potential problem that many of you may be wrestling with even now as you listen to this message. And that's this: if we experience adversity where we cannot foresee anything good because we don't know what's coming next, how can we be confident that the adversity God has ordained in our life is better or even good at all? I think it's important to consider God's wisdom in the cross. So let's pretend we have the superpower of time travel and see what it was like to experience the cross from the perspective of one disciple, Peter. See, after Jesus was arrested and on trial, Jesus connected eyes with Peter right as he was denying him the third time. See, Peter failed Jesus and essentially experienced a silent rebuke of disapproval from his faithful leader, and Peter went out and wept bitterly. See, Peter had expected the Messiah to come and defeat Rome and restore the kingdom of Israel on earth, and his hopes were being shattered. He was disappointed, to say the least, completely devastated. Ashamed and fearful, Peter seemingly lacked the courage to even witness Jesus' crucifixion in person. Afterwards, he was left bewildered among the other disciples, struggling to deal with the death of their beloved leader. See, Peter was experiencing significant adversity. He was struggling to deal with disapproval, disappointment, and death, all wrapped into one tragic event. But on the third day, when Jesus was resurrected, what had seemed to Peter to be the most crooked thing he could imagine turned out to be the best thing in history. And afterwards, by God's grace, Peter was repentant, reconciled with Jesus, and restored to his position for ministry. And in God's wisdom, Peter's failures amidst adversity are on display for all of us to demonstrate, I think, that salvation is entirely by God's grace. See, this plan that Peter had disputed on various occasions, even once rebuking Jesus, had already been named. And upon reflection, Peter realized that everything that had happened was under God's sovereign control. He's even quoted in Acts chapter 2, preaching, when he says this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified by the hands of lawless men. See, God is always in control, even amidst sin, brokenness, and chaos. But life in this fallen world is often a paradox. Sometimes what seems best to us turns out to not be good at all. And sometimes what seems to be worst turns out to be better. So as we consider God's wisdom in the cross, may it grow our trust in God's wisdom amidst our circumstances, including our current adversity. Now let's shift our focus to considering God's wisdom in the mystery. Knowing the future does not necessarily make it easier to trust God. I think what makes Peter's fall seem so surprising as we read the gospel account is that Jesus had revealed key details about the future to him beforehand. Jesus had warned Peter that very night that he would deny him 3 times. He'd clearly foretold on multiple occasions his death and resurrection that were to come. And yet, with all of that foreknowledge disclosed, Peter still failed. Additionally, knowing the future does not necessarily ease adversity. Consider Jesus. When he left the prosperity of heaven, the true prosperity that actually satisfies, to enter life under the sun, he knew he was entering into adversity and suffering. The night before his arrest, in anticipation of the agony of his crucifixion, it even says that he sweat blood. So knowing the future did not make enduring his adversity any easier. Yet, Jesus surrendered his will to the wisdom of the Father's plan. And on the other hand, a clearer understanding of eternity is to our advantage. See, the writer of Ecclesiastes had less clarity around death than we do today. He saw death as inevitable, as mysterious, as leveling, but much less had been revealed at that point in history about eternity. But as Christians today, we know that death has been defeated in Christ, that as believers, we will be with the Lord immediately upon our death, and we will all be raised with glorified bodies to eternal life upon Christ's return. So while God has graciously revealed to us the very distant future, in his wisdom he has still hidden the details of tomorrow. And by not disclosing the future, I want you to think about this, God gives us an opportunity to trust and humbly depend on him amidst the unknown. I think he also gives us the opportunity to experience hope and wonder in a more significant and profound way. And he spares us the unbearable anxiety of anticipating upcoming suffering. So as we end, I want us to think of a right response of man to God. How can we give glory to God in all things? Well, as Paul said in Philippians 4, verse 11, "For I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." In the classical Puritan book, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment, which meditates upon Philippians 4, Jeremiah Burroughs suggests that contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Brothers and sisters, are we truly content in every condition? Are we content with our homes, our cars, our jobs? Are we content with the brokenness in our bodies? Are we content persevering in a difficult marriage or with infertility struggles? Or are we content in singleness? Are we content with that diagnosis? Are we content amidst disapprovals, disappointments, and deaths that we have endured? Are we content in God's wisdom in unanswered prayers? As 7:14 concludes, "In the day of good, be good. Enjoy it, and thank God, but hold his gifts loosely." When life is better, when adversity comes, don't dispute with God, but instead pause to consider that what might he be doing with me through it? See, a right response of man to God is ultimately this: embrace the sovereign wisdom of God who alone knows